Thanks, we've got it from here. Why don't you take 5?
Of course, doctor.
As you don't follow to the flames, sleep like the circuit's bashed.
You just let him walk you out. He's young, it's fine. Multiple casualties inbound.
Careful, Joe.
Bus and a semi on Route 9.
They're saying a lot of kids.
Reyes Brow, you're the resident. Tell us what to do.
Okay, Shay, I need Brett. Everybody just...
Steady hands. Slow breath. The panic waits until the work's done. One at a time is how you lose them all. Everybody who can hear me, listen. You. The quiet ones are the ones fading. Move.
Who are you?
At 7:15 on a gray Tuesday morning, they escorted Beatrice Kowalski out of the trauma bay like she was a visitor who had wandered somewhere she didn't belong. A young resident put 2 fingers on her shoulder, gentle the way you'd guide a lost grandmother, and said, "We've got it from here." She was in her scrubs. She had clocked in. She had been restocking the crash cart the way she had every morning for 6 years, quiet as the hum of the vending machine down the hall. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said her name. The floor simply closed over the space where she'd been standing, the way water closes over a dropped stone. She didn't argue. That was the thing people would remember later, when everything had turned inside out. She didn't argue. She set down the roll of tape she'd been holding, nodded once, and walked to the supply room where the overhead light buzzed and the shelves smelled of paper and plastic and cold. She folded a stack of blue gowns that didn't need folding. Her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady. That was the first thing they'd taught her, a long time ago, in a place with no walls and too much noise. Steady hands, slow breath. The panic can wait until the work is done. Beatrice was 63 years old. She wore her gray hair in a short, practical cut. She trimmed herself over the bathroom sink. She was a heavy woman, soft through the middle in a way that made strangers speak to her a little slower, a little louder, as though softness of body meant softness of mind. She had a way of standing very still in a room, of listening more than she spoke, and to the bright young staff of Millbrook Community Hospital, she was simply the aide who kept the carts stocked and never made a fuss. If they used a name at all, the nice lady in the corner. They didn't know she'd learned to stand still, because in certain rooms, in a certain life, stillness was the only thing between you and a wound that wouldn't close. The resident's name was Elliot Reyes. He was 29 and brilliant and terrified of both those facts in equal measure, though he'd have sooner died than admit the second one. He had graduated near the top of a very good program. He moved fast and talked faster, and had already decided, in the private ledger he kept of everyone he met, exactly how much each person was worth to him. Beatrice Kowalski, he had decided, was worth a polite smile and nothing more. He wasn't cruel, that's important. He was simply young enough to believe that the things he could see were the only things that were there. That Tuesday morning, the ambulance bay was quiet. The coffee in the break room was burnt. A nurse named Priya complained about the parking, and an orderly told a joke that wasn't funny, and Elliot reviewed a chart with the particular crispness of a man performing competence for an invisible audience. It was, for 11 more minutes, an ordinary day. Then the radio on the wall crackled, and the charge nurse's face changed, and the ordinary day ended. "Multiple casualties inbound," she said, and her voice had gone flat and fast. "School bus and a semi. Route 9, the overpass. They're saying..." She stopped, swallowed. "They're saying a lot of kids." For a moment, nobody moved. It's a strange thing, that moment. You train and you drill, and you tell yourself you're ready, and then the words come and the whole room simply stops. Every person inside it, privately hoping someone else will be the one to start. Millbrook was a community hospital. It had one trauma bay, a modest ER, a staff that on a busy night handled heart attacks and broken hips, and the occasional emergency. It did not, in any real sense, have a plan for 30 children arriving at once. Elliot felt his own heart slam against his ribs. He looked at the charge nurse and saw she was looking at him, because he was the resident, because in that moment, He was the closest thing to a doctor standing in the room, and the terror rose in him so fast and so total that his ears rang with it. 30 children. He had never run a mass casualty. He had read about them. He had passed a test about them. That was not the same thing, and some cold, clear part of him knew it was not the same thing, and that knowing was worse than the fear. Down the hall, in the supply room, Beatrice heard the overhead page. She heard the specific pitch of the charge nurse's voice, and she heard the word children, and something in her went very quiet and very old. She had heard that pitch before. In a canvas tent under a sky the color of dust, with a distant thudding in the middle distance, and a line of stretchers that did not end. She had heard it in a stone hospital in a mountain town, whose name the news never said correctly, when the market disaster brought them children with faces they were still learning to have. She had heard it enough times that her body knew the sound before her mind had finished translating it. Her pulse did not spike, it slowed. Her hands, holding a folded gown, stopped shaking with an anger she hadn't admitted to, and went perfectly, professionally still. Master Sergeant Beatrice Kowalski, United States Army, retired, 26 years, 3 deployments. Chief of a forward surgical nursing team that had run pediatric mass triage in conditions that would have made the tidy trauma bay of Millbrook Community look like a spa. She had trained battlefield medics who now ran emergency departments in 4 states. She had written a protocol, once, that was still taught, though nobody who taught it knew her name. She had held more dying children than she would ever say out loud, and she had brought more living ones back from the edge than she could count. And she had come home from all of it and taken a quiet job stocking carts in an Ohio hospital because after a certain amount of noise, a person needs the quiet more than they need to be known. She set the gown down. She walked out of the supply room. The first ambulance was already screaming into the bay. What Beatrice saw when she reached the ambulance doors was panic pretending to be a plan. Elliot Reyes stood at the center of it, and he was shouting, and the shouting was the sound of a smart man drowning. 2 children came off the first rig, and he went to the nearer one. A boy with a scalp injury bleeding bright and terrible down his face, and he crouched over that one boy and began to work. And Beatrice watched the exact moment the whole response died, because there was one of him. And behind that first ambulance there were 2 more, and behind those, sirens. He had gone to the loudest wound. He had not counted. He had not sorted. He had knelt down beside a single bleeding child and let the flood come at him, one body at a time, and one body at a time was how you lost them all. She knew, with the certainty of a person who has watched it happen, that in 90 seconds this bay would have 4 critical children on the floor, and no one deciding who lived. She knew that the child crying loudest was rarely the child fading fastest. She knew 100 things that no one in this building knew, and she had exactly no authority to say a single one of them. So she didn't ask for authority. She took it. Everybody who can hear me, listen. Her voice came out of her the way it hadn't in 6 years, and it was not loud, exactly. It was worse than loud. It was the voice of someone who had decided, and the flat, unhurried command in it cut through the noise like a blade through gauze. Heads turned. Priya's turned. The charge nurses turned. Elliot's head came up from the bleeding boy, his face a mask of blood and fear and fury, and he opened his mouth to say something about the aide, the corner lady. Who did she think? You, Beatrice said, pointing at him, and it was not a request. That boy is stable enough to wait 90 seconds. Pressure dressing. Hand it to the mother if she's here, and get up. I need your hands for the ones who are quiet. Excuse me, who? Elliot started. The quiet ones are the ones fading, she said. Move. There is a thing that happens to trained people in a disaster, a thing they don't teach and can't fake. When the water is rising and someone speaks with true authority, not loud, not panicked, but certain, the drowning mind grabs it like a rope. Elliot Reyes did not know who this woman was. He knew, in the animal part of him that had given up on knowing, that she knew exactly what she was doing, and that he did not, and that children were about to die in the space between those 2 facts. He clamped a dressing over the boy's scalp, pressed the mother's shaking hands onto it, and got up. Tell me what to do, he said. The words cost him something. He would think about that cost, later, for a long time. Beatrice was already moving down the line of arriving children, and as she moved, she did a thing that Elliot would describe, weeks afterward, as the strangest and most beautiful piece of medicine he had ever seen. She sorted them, fast. A hand on a forehead, 2 fingers to a throat. A question snapped and an answer weighed. Can you tell me your name? Squeeze my finger, follow the light. And with each child she said a color, just a color, and someone wrote it down. Green. That one walks and talks and can wait. Put her with the ant, keep her warm. Yellow. Hurt and bleeding but breathing. That one goes to bed 4. Watch him. Red. This one now. The girl with the silent chest and the gray lips. Red. Get her flat. Get me a line. Get me Reyes. She had no time for gentleness, and so gentleness came out of her sideways, in the low, steady stream of her voice that never once rose to a shout. You're all right. I've got you. You're doing so well. Look at me. That's it. Look right here. She said it to children who were unconscious. She said it to a boy whose leg was hurt in a way legs shouldn't be. She said it because she had learned, in a canvas tent under a dust-colored sky, that a scared child hears the tone before the words, and the tone is medicine too. She grabbed a black marker off the counter, a fat, permanent marker meant for labeling specimen bags, and when a nurse asked her where the triage tags were and there weren't enough, Beatrice pulled a child's sleeve up and wrote the numbers directly onto the small, pale skin. Heart rate, time, a single letter for the color. She wrote it on their arms in black marker, because paper tags tear and fall off and get lost, and skin doesn't, and a receiving nurse 3 feet away could read a child's whole story in one glance without stopping to ask. Elliot watched her write a pulse on the forearm of a 4-year-old, and something in his chest turned over, because it was so simple and so smart, and he had never once thought of it. Where did you? He began. Red child, bed 1, now, she said. Talk later. They worked. God, how they worked. The bay filled and filled, 31 children in the end, and 8 adults, the bus driver and the truck driver and passers-by who'd stopped and been hurt helping. And, for the first 8 minutes, Millbrook Community Hospital ran on the spine of a 63-year-old woman in an Aide's scrubs, and it held. It held because she'd decided the order of things before the panic could decide it for them. She sent the green children and their frantic parents to the far waiting room with a single calm nurse and a promise. She stacked the yellows in the hallway on gurneys, in a line she could see all at once. Each one marked, each one watched. She kept the reds. There were 4, then 5, then, terribly, 6, in the trauma bay and the 2 exam rooms flanking it, and she moved between them like a needle drawing thread, and she put Elliot Reyes where his young, fast hands could do the most good and kept him there. Chest's not moving on the left, she said, over the girl with the gray lips. You know what that is. Tension pneumo, Elliot said, and his voice cracked, because he knew the words and had never done the thing. Then decompress it. Second intercostal, mid-clavicular. I'll count with you. You've done this. I haven't. You have now, Beatrice said. 14 gauge. My hand's right here. Go. He went. The needle went in, and the girl's chest rose, and her lips came back from gray toward pink. And Elliot Reyes made a sound that was half a sob, and Beatrice said, quiet, only for him. Good. That's a life. Next one, and turned him by the shoulder toward the next one, because grief and joy were both luxuries, and there was no time yet to afford either. This is a good moment to tell you something, before we go on, before the hardest part. These stories take a long while to gather and to tell the right way, and if you find, somewhere in the ache of this one, that it's staying with you, that's all I hope for. That's the whole of it. Now, the hardest part. They were 9 minutes into it, and holding, when the wall broke. A red child in exam room 2 arrested, went from breathing to not breathing, between one of Beatrice's passes and the next, and at the very same moment, the 6th ambulance called ahead to say they were bringing in 2 more, a girl trapped under the bus who'd been the last one cut free, and the charge nurse's voice went thin and high, and Priya, who was a good nurse and a strong one, backed away from the arresting child with her gloved hands up and said, "I can't. I don't. Somebody needs to." And just like that, the spine of the thing bent, and Beatrice felt the whole response begin to tilt toward the ground. You cannot be in two rooms. That is the oldest truth of the work, and the cruelest. Beatrice was doing chest compressions on a 9-year-old in one room, while a nurse fell apart in another, and a new critical child rolled through the doors, and there were, in that instant, more dying children than there were competent hands. And the arithmetic of it was the arithmetic she had run in her nightmares for 30 years. Somebody, in a moment like this, does not get saved. That is what mass casualty means. It means you will do everything right, and a child will still slip away because there was only one of you, and you will carry the face. And here, in this ordinary Ohio hospital, with a fluorescent light buzzing and a specimen marker still uncapped on the counter, Beatrice Kowalski hit the wall she had walked away from the army to never hit again. She kept doing compressions. She counted out loud, steady, steady, and over the child's small chest she looked up and found Elliot Reyes's eyes across the room, and she saw that he saw it too. The arithmetic, the tilt, the child in room 2 fading while she compressed the child in room 1. "Reyes," she said, and for the first time all morning something moved in her voice that was not certainty. "I need you to run the code in 2. I can't do that alone. You can. I taught you the last 9 minutes on purpose. You're not the resident who walked in this morning. Go be the one who walks out." She held his eyes. "I have to stay on this chest. If I lift my hands, this one's gone. You are the only pair of hands that can go to that room. Do you understand me? This is the job. This is the whole job. Go." And Elliot Reyes, 29, terrified, brilliant, 3 fingers of which had touched a woman's shoulder that morning and told her they had it from here, turned and ran into room 2 and did the hardest thing he had ever done, alone, with her voice through the wall counting a rhythm he could hang his own 2 hands on. 2 rooms, 2 children, 1 steady voice stretched between them like a wire, holding them both off the ground by sheer refusal. The child under Beatrice's hands came back, a pulse, thready, then stronger. She sat back on her heels and let out 1 breath, exactly 1, and then she was up and moving, because that is what you do. You do not get to stop, and in room 2, Elliot's child came back too, ragged and crying was the most beautiful sound in the building. There was one more. There is always one more. A boy, maybe 7, who'd come in green, walking, talking, marked with a green G on his forearm in Beatrice's black marker, and who was sitting quiet in the waiting room with a Millbrook volunteer when he stopped being quiet in the wrong way. It was Beatrice who saw it. She was crossing the hall for the 20th time when something caught the corner of her eye and pulled it. Some wrongness she couldn't have named to you. The particular stillness of a child who is not resting but leaving. She was moving before she'd decided to move. His name was Marcus. His little sister Sophia was in bed 4. He had walked in on his own 2 feet with nothing but a scrape, and something inside him, some slow bleed the eye couldn't see, had been quietly filling a space that shouldn't fill. He'd gone gray. He was slumped against the volunteer, who thought he'd fallen asleep. "Move him flat, now," Beatrice said, and she was on her knees on the waiting room floor with him before the words were finished, and her hands read his belly and went cold. Rigid, distended. A child who walks in green and fades from what you couldn't see. That is the ghost that walks behind every triage nurse for the rest of her life. The reminder that your best sorting is still only a guess, that the body keeps secrets. She had walked back into that exact ghost, on a linoleum floor, under a buzzing light, at the far edge of the worst morning that little hospital had ever known. She could have called for someone. She was the aide. She had no orders, no privileges, no place doing what she was about to do. But there was no time to explain herself to a system that had spent 6 years not knowing who she was, and there was a 7-year-old fading on the floor, and Beatrice Kowalski had made her peace, long ago, with the price of being the one who acts. "Reyes!" Her voice went down the hall like a shot. "Waiting room. Now. Bring the ultrasound and a wide bore." Internal bleed. He's crashing. Move. And Elliot moved. He came at a dead run with the machine, and he dropped to the floor across the boy's body from her. And Beatrice pushed his hands to the right place and said the words fast and flat. And the two of them, the retired master sergeant and the resident who'd tried to walk her out that morning, fought for that boy's life on a waiting room floor, while 30 parents watched and wept and prayed around them in a ragged circle. It was there, on that floor, that Elliot finally understood what he was looking at. Not an aide, not a lucky old woman, someone who had done this 100 times, in places far worse than this, and who was doing it now with the calm of a person for whom this, even this, was not the worst day she had known. Marcus lived. The surgeon they finally got on the phone said afterward that 10 more minutes and he'd have been gone, and that whoever caught it on the floor had caught the uncatchable. Whoever, he said. Nobody in that hospital could have told him the name. By 11 that morning it was over in the way these things are over, which is to say the crisis had ended and the grief had only begun. 31 children had come through the doors of Millbrook Community. 29 of them would go home. 2 would not, and Beatrice would carry those 2 faces the way she carried all the others, in the quiet place behind her steady hands, and she would not pretend to you or to anyone that saving 29 made the 2 weigh less. That is not how it works. She knew exactly how it worked. She had known for 30 years. The bay emptied slow. Children went up to surgery, out to Columbus by helicopter, home in the arms of shaking parents. The floor filled with the after quiet, the wet-eyed relief, the trembling hands, the coffee somebody finally thought to make, its steam rising close and warm and ordinary in a room that had just held the extraordinary. Beatrice found herself back where she'd started the day, near the crash cart, restocking it, because it was empty now, and someone had to, and her hands needed the work. Her scrubs were ruined. There was a child's blood dried brown on her forearm, over her own old scar that ran there, the one she never talked about. She was very tired. She was 63, and she had just done, for 2 hours, the hardest thing a body can do, and no one, in the crush of it, had thought to ask her name. That is where it would have ended. She would have gone home to her small apartment and her cat and her silence, and Monday she'd have come back and stocked the carts, and the story of the woman who saved the morning would have dissolved into 100 half-memories. The aide, the corner lady, wasn't she something in the crash? What was her name again? That is how it ends for people like Beatrice, most of the time. The quiet ones do the work, and the quiet closes over them like water over a stone. But there was a father in that building who would not let it. His name was Colonel David Hauntz, a serving officer, Army, home on leave, and it was his daughter, little Sophia, in bed 4, whose brother Marcus had crashed on the waiting room floor. He had arrived in the middle of the worst of it, been held back by staff, made to wait the way parents are made to wait, and from the edge of that circle on the linoleum, he had watched a heavy gray-haired woman in an aide's scrubs run a resuscitation on his son. And Colonel Hauntz had gone very still, the way soldiers go still when they see something they recognize in a place they don't expect it. Because he knew that calm, he knew that voice, flat and certain, the one that turns a drowning man's hands back into instruments. He knew the black marker on the children's arms. He had seen it done exactly that way, once, in a field hospital outside a city that no longer existed, by a legend the medics only ever spoke of in a certain lowered tone. He had been a young lieutenant then, hurt in a place he doesn't discuss, and the hands that had sorted him and sent him to the right table and told him, "You're all right, I've got you, look right here." Those hands had belonged to a master sergeant whose face he had never quite forgotten and whose name he had never known. He found her at the crash cart. Both his children were alive and stable, and he had left their bedsides to do this, because some debts are older than the ones in front of you. "Ma'am," he said. Beatrice looked up. "Your boy's stable," she said. "The girl too, you should be with them." "I will be." He didn't move. He was in civilian clothes, a plain jacket, an ordinary father. But he stood the way she stood, and she noticed it, and something passed between them, some recognition of tribe. "I need to ask you something first." Where did you learn to triage like that? Around, Beatrice said. She capped the marker. Long time ago. Around where? She held his eyes. She had spent 6 years not answering that question because no one had ever thought to ask it, and now a man was asking it who already knew. She could see he already knew, and something in her that had been folded away for a very long time began, quietly, to unfold. Bagram, she said. Landstuhl, a few places with no name worth saying. She paused. 26 years. By now, the afterquiet had drawn people near. Priya, the charge nurse, an attending who'd finally arrived, a knot of exhausted staff hovering at the edge of the strangest conversation of their morning, and Elliot Reyes. Elliot was there, at the back, still in his ruined scrubs, watching the woman he'd tried to walk out at 7:15, and he did not yet know why the serving officer had gone the particular color a man goes when he is about to salute. "What was your rank?" Colonel Hans said. Beatrice was quiet a moment. Then, because he had asked, because someone had finally asked. "Master Sergeant, I ran a forward surgical nursing team. Pediatric mass triage was..." She almost smiled, and it was the saddest and truest thing on her face all morning, was rather the whole of the job. The colonel closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, and he did a thing then that no one in that hospital had ever seen a person do to the corner lady, the aide, the nice quiet woman who stocked the carts. He came to attention. He straightened his spine and squared his shoulders in his plain civilian jacket in the middle of an Ohio emergency room, and he raised his hand in a slow, crisp salute, and he held it. "Master Sergeant Kowalski," he said, and his voice was not quite steady, and he didn't care. "I don't think you'll remember me. I was a lieutenant, outside a city I won't name. 11 years ago, on a table you sorted me to. You told me I was all right. You told me to look right here." His held hand trembled. "You were the reason I got to come home and have these 2 children who are alive in this building because of you. Again, twice now. You saved my whole life twice, and I never knew your name." The emergency room had gone silent, utterly silent. 30 staff and drifting family members stood frozen, and every eye was on the heavy gray-haired woman by the crash cart, and you could watch the knowledge move across their faces one by one, like light coming up over a field. Priya's hand went to her mouth. The charge nurse made a small sound. And at the back, Elliot Reyes stood with the whole morning rearranging itself behind his eyes. Every command she'd given, every life she'd pulled back, the marker, the sorting, the wire of her voice strung between 2 dying rooms. And he understood, all at once, and far too late, exactly who he had put 2 fingers on, and told, "We've got it from here." Beatrice looked at the saluting colonel for a long moment. Then she straightened, without seeming to decide to, some old reflex older than her own will, and she gave him the smallest nod, and she said, "Quiet. At ease, sir." And he came down from the salute, and she reached out and gripped his forearm the way you grip a soldier's, and neither of them said anything else because there wasn't anything else that needed saying. It was Elliot who broke. He came forward through the parted staff, and he stopped in front of her, and this was the young man who defended his own worth like a fortress, who kept a ledger of what everyone was worth to him, and he could not get the first words out. When they came rough. "This morning He stopped, started over. "I walked you out. I put my hand on you and I walked you out of the trauma bay and I told you we had it." His jaw worked. "We did not have it. I did not have it. 31 kids came through those doors and I'd have lost half of them in the first 10 minutes if you hadn't." His voice failed him. "I don't even know your name. I've worked 6 feet from you for 2 years and I never once asked your name." "Beatrice," she said, not unkindly. "Bea's fine." "That's not." Elliot shook his head, and there were tears standing in his eyes now. The tears of a proud young man learning something about himself he'd have paid a great deal not to know. "You taught me how to put in a needle that saved a girl's life while you were doing compressions in the next room. You did that on purpose. You said, go be the one who walks out." He swallowed hard. "Why would you spend that on me? This morning I treated you like you were nothing. Why would you?" Beatrice put the marker down on the cart and looked at him, and when she spoke it was not a rebuke, though it landed harder than any rebuke could have. "Because you were the hands I had," she said simply. "In a room like that, you don't get to pick who you save the children with. You use what's in front of you." This morning, what was in front of me was a scared young man who was going to be a very good doctor once somebody stopped letting him think he already was one. She almost smiled again. "That's the whole secret, son. Everybody in every room is more than the thing you can see. The quiet ones especially. The quiet ones most of all." She picked up a fresh box of gauze and set it on the shelf where it went. "You couldn't see me because you weren't looking," she said. "Nobody was. That's all right. I stopped needing to be looked at a long time ago." They gave her a proper role in the end. Training, a title, a raise she waved half of away. The newspapers came, and she declined every one of them, and the piece that ran was 3 paragraphs and got her rank wrong, and she didn't care. What she did care about, quietly, was the 2 children she had lost. She visited both families. She sat with them a long time. She told them the truth, which is that their children had been held by someone who knew how to hold the dying, and that they had not been alone, and they had not been afraid. To those families, that was worth more than any medal the army had ever pinned on her. It ends a few weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday, 7:15 in the morning, the same gray hour it all began. Elliot Reyes came onto the floor early, the way he did now, and he found Beatrice at the crash cart, restocking it, quiet as the hum of the vending machine down the hall. He didn't put 2 fingers on her shoulder. He set a coffee down beside her, the way she took it, because he'd learned that too, and he said, "Morning, Master Sergeant," and she said, "It's B," and he said, "I know, morning B," and she almost smiled and handed him the clipboard and started to teach him the thing she was going to spend the rest of her working life teaching that young hospital: how to sort the dying, how to find the quiet one who's slipping, how to write a life on a child's bare arm in permanent marker so the next set of hands can read it in a single glance. The one you overlook may be the one who saves you. Beatrice Kowalski knew that already. She'd known it in a canvas tent under a dust-colored sky, sorting the loud from the dying. She'd just been waiting, quiet and unhurried, for the world around her to catch up. These stories are made with love, and they take real care to tell the way they deserve. If this one stayed with you, if Beatrice stayed with you, then subscribe and sit with the next one when it comes. That is all I ask.